Hello! Today I'm going to talk about toilets. Now this kit will be instantly recognisable to any traveller out there. And when I first arrived at this place, that's all I had. But clearly it's not really good for a permanent setup. So after reading a lot about the subject, I came up with a compost loo system and ran that for about 5 years, and yeah, I didn't really like it. So as soon as I could, I built a flushing loo, your bog standard bog. So in this episode I'm going to talk about compost loos, flushing loos, and I'll show you the setups. So let's go and have a look at the remains of the compost loo. Here we are in a big cabin then, and it's just used for storage now, but I did live here once. And behind here is the little shed that was where the compost loo lived. Let's go and try and find it. Well, as you can see, it's not been used for a while. Believe it or not, there is a shed in here. Right, inside the shed, what's left of it, you should be able to see just there, there's a bog standard chemical loo. And I used that, but instead of any chemicals, I used copious amounts of sawdust. And that gave you about a week's worth of usage. Then after a week, you take that bucket, so you lift the bucket out of the toilet and go and dump it in a huge compost bin. So it's basically one of the same containers that I now collect rainwater in. So it stands about this tall, but with the top cut off and loads of holes drilled in the bottom, and you just hoik it in there. And I had 2 of those, and I found that one of those worked for about 3 years. It took about 3 years to fill it most of the way up. Then I'd switch to the other one, and by the time the other one was full, the first one was completely non-offensive tilth, and you could just empty that into the trees in my case. And that was the least offensive form of compost loo that I could think of at the time. Normally the more sophisticated compost loo, if you like, involves definitely needs separation of the liquid and the solid, because if you just lump it all together, that's when compost loos really go wrong, and they reek. But with this system you didn't need to have any separation, because whatever was in there was only in there for a week, and then it went off into the great big bin, and that bin was probably 90% sawdust. So yeah, that did work okay, but it's still not really good enough. It's kind of summed up by my granddad every time he came to visit. He'd sit me down at some point and he'd go, "Look, you will never get a woman without a flushing toilet." Now he wasn't quite right. There were women that put up with compost loos, but yeah, I think it does increase your options, let's put it that way. Plus the other thing I was always uneasy with is the idea of just with the mainstream compost loo is you're perching yourself above 6 months worth of human waste, and I just wasn't really into that. Plus you only need one bout of food poisoning and have it coming out of both ends to really appreciate the ability to just flush everything away once you finish purging. So let's see, I've got 2 flushing toilets, 2 different systems. Let's go and look at the simpler one first. Here we are at the little cabin then, and just before I moved out I built this little extension on the side of the cabin which housed the first flushing loo to be up here. Still works, it's a good little system. Let's try and explain how it works. We'll have a look inside. I have to take it off the tripod, so we're going to switch to wobbly cam. So toilet, cheapest toilet that Screwfix did, about £60 I think that was, brand new. And we've got a little steampunk stylish sink. So we've got a stainless steel mixing bowl that I drilled a hole in and put a waste on. And so yeah, that cost me about £1 or £2. And then this is just a bit of plumbing that I had left over. That's a gate valve there, and a bit of black iron pipe in a 90-degree bend makes the tap. So simple, straightforward. The downside of this system is that I had to carry the water up here because the way the little cabin is built doesn't really allow for rainwater collection. So I sack truck up a jerry can of water every couple of days. Right, we'll try and go behind the cabin and see where all this goes. Okay, so what you're looking at now is the outlet from the toilet down here. This is a vent pipe with a mesh on the top, and then the pipe itself goes down there. You can see a bit of it sticking out. So the little cabin is built on a very steep hill, and the pipe goes down to, I think it goes down to there, where there's a drum buried in the ground. I'll explain that in a minute. This tank line on its side used to be on this shelf here, and that's what fed the system. So I bring a jerry can round the corner here and tip it in the top, and that fed the little sink and the toilet. So how does that system work up in the little cabin? Well, that pipe that you saw going down the hill, that terminates in a plastic drum on its side. The drum is basically one of these. This is obviously a metal version, and this particular one I've been using as an incinerator. But if you imagine this was plastic, it was lying like that, the pipe comes into it, and about halfway up on both sides I've drilled holes, probably about the size of my finger, so 1/2-inch holes all the way along it, loads of them on both sides. And then that works as a normal septic tank, but on a smaller scale. So it fills up with fluid and solid, and then it starts to weep out of these, and it just trickles through the hill itself. So I can't remember where I got the idea for this, but I obviously read about it somewhere on the internet, and I put it up there as a bit of an experiment, and it works really well. Bloody crows. Anyway, I suppose eventually it will fill up, but most of the time it's digesting away there, and it's turning that solid into liquid. More liquid's arriving all the time, and it's coming out the sides, and it does last a long time. Eventually it'll stop working, and then you can either dig it up and empty it, or you can just make another one next door. Leave the original one a few years and then dig it up and empty it maybe. The one at the cabin's been there for a long time, many years, only in part-time use, I hasten to add, but it's still going strong. So this is a small version of the main septic system. Right, so let's head inside and look at the main system. Back to the wobbly cam then, because it's a very small space. There we've got a loo. Same thing, cheapest loo that Screwfix did. I just put a posh seat on it. And then let's quick look at the rest of the bathroom. And I'm showing you this because the whole suite, I got a whole bathroom suite for I think £15 from eBay. And you can get some absolute bargains like that, so you can get quite a nice bathroom like I have here for next to nothing. And the reason is you just find someone that's renovating their house and they're putting in a new super expensive bathroom. They need to get rid of the old one, and then you've got to pay someone to take it away. They've got to skip it, which costs money, or they put it on eBay, and if it sells for anything, they're more than happy. Incidentally, here you might be able to see it says bath, just about. And these wacky patterns and everything, this came from the cladding that was on Southgate Shopping Centre in Bath, which I was lucky enough to be given. Obviously this wasn't terribly useful, but all the wood shoring that was on the shops before they were opened made the walls of the barn. small space. So we've got bath, sink, and then the loo. Right, so where does it flush to? So the barn's up here, and there's a pipe running underground through the vegetable garden, and then through here somewhere, and then basically behind this beehive, behind these coppice trees, is the septic tank. There's literally nothing to see there apart from a vent pipe sticking out of the ground. Now I made the point you don't want to plant trees too close to the tank, whether it's plastic or concrete. Yeah, they will damage it in time. The septic tank I have is basically behind this lot, and when the trees here get too big, if I feel they're encroaching, I'll cut them down. So there's really nothing to show you here. Obviously it's all underground, so we'll head back inside and I'll draw you one of my terrible pictures and try and explain how it all works. Septic tanks then, how do they work? Well, there's two main types. There's the traditional rectangular one, which has got sections in it, and then there's the more modern onion shaped one, which is something like that. Right, so hoping this shows up. Now on this onion shaped one, this is the one that you see installed now. These are normally made of plastic, and when they're stuck in a hole in the ground and then they're backfilled with loads of concrete, because otherwise when they're full and they're in soggy ground, they would actually rise up. Now there's not much digestion that can go on in here because there's only a small air to liquid interface, whereas in your traditional septic tank you can see there's much more air to liquid interaction that's able to go on. And the way these both work then is the waste will come in and it will enter in here. It doesn't splash into the top because that would ruin the system, so it tends to come in as gently as possible into the bottom. Digestion occurs here in the main section in this one, and then it overflows into the smaller section, and then it overflows and then it goes out into a leach field or whatever soak away system you've got. So most of the digestion goes on here, and then this is mostly liquid with a few bits of solid in suspension, and then this is reasonably clear stuff. Over here in this one, not much happens because there's not much interaction, like I say, between the air and the liquid. The reason you need the air and the liquid interaction is because what's going on here is aerobic digestion. That's what most of the action is. So with this system here, it's very rare that it will need emptying. This system here needs emptying quite often because it's only partly digesting things. Right, so a bit more detail then on how my one works. And here we've got that rectangular box, and it's divided into two, and this is buried just under the ground. The top of it is reinforced concrete panels, so I've made these panels going across the top there. They interlock and they're very strong. I've designed it so you could drive over it. You can't drive anywhere near it because it's surrounded by trees, but I wanted to make that really strong because, yeah, the trauma of falling in there would be awful. So if that's the level of the liquid in there, and then the pipe comes in, where would the pipe come in? About there. The pipe comes in and it has a pipe going down there. Some of this is showing up. So yeah, everything comes in there, drops to the bottom there, it's digested in here, overflows into that one, and then this overflows into what I've done is I've got a trench, so it's like a culvert here. It's basically a big fat pipe that I've cut in half lengthways, and then I've used that to make an arch, and that runs down there and everything soaks away. And yeah, that works really well. So this, I'll try and find some photos that I took of the construction of this so it makes a bit more sense, and I'll insert those. But basically the whole thing here is a big rectangular box made of concrete, and I had to pour it all in one go to make it monolithic. And then I think the wall I made the next day, yeah, so that was another pour of concrete, and then I rendered everything to make it waterproof inside. And that's been there many years now, and with no problems at all. So down this comes the flush from the toilet, but also the shower water, the bath water, and the washing up water, the washing machine water. All the grey water and all the black water basically comes down this pipe and into here, and off it goes. And that's how I do it. It's as simple as that. So some people have reed beds and they have filtration systems and all this kind of malarkey. Some people use grey water harvesting systems, and they use the grey water on their garden, things like that. I found there's more than enough rainwater to use on all of that. The wastewater, it's just waste. Send it off there, processes it, off it goes. There is so much water around in the UK, it's just silly. So yeah, I've got no issue at all with just sending it all away, all goes down there. Right. That's an awful picture, but yeah, with the photos as well, you should get some idea of how it works. I found a few photos then of the construction, and I thought rather than drop them into the video, I'd film them on the laptop so I can point out the various features. So this one's the big hole that I dug. You can just about see the pipe coming in there, and this OSB was just a load of scrap wood that I had left over from the walls of the barn that I'm starting to use here as shuttering for the hole. And there's a cap. So here you can see the shuttering taking shape, and it needs lots of bracing. I had to put even more bracing than this in, and you can see there's nothing at the bottom because obviously I'm pouring the concrete down there first and then pouring it down these sides, and I had to get it in the floor up to a decent depth and then up the sides to the top, and I had to do all that in one go, which was an epic day's mixing the concrete. So here's a few days later, and you can see that there's a concrete box there now, there's a concrete wall across there, and here you can see the input pipe. So it comes in here, and there's a T-piece here, that's the vent on top, and that drops everything in under the surface of the water, so it doesn't, because you're going to have a surface layer on there which is important to keep established, so it drops it in without too much turbulence, and then this overflows through that pipe into this chamber, and then this overflows through there, and you can see the trench arch there. And here you can see that I'm just starting to make the reinforced concrete panels to go on the top. And this is a close-up of those panels, so you can see that they interlock, so they go that way and then that way and so forth across there. That's probably the best view of it actually constructed. So that's it really. I just wanted to give an overview of the systems that I used and the things that I found have worked for me in practice. And the reason I thought it was important to make this video is that I found that the reality of a lot of the stuff that I'd read about wasn't quite the way that I'd read it, if you see what I mean. And by that I'm saying lots of things that I'd read in the books, particularly when it came to compost toilets, in actual everyday use weren't that way at all. A lot of the downsides associated with flushing toilets and septic systems just don't exist in reality. And by that I mean as soon as I'd made the barn, or even as soon as if I'd made the workshop first, as soon as I'd made that, there is so much rainwater if you collect it efficiently that you can use that for everything. So I use that rainwater for a washing machine, and for the garden, you know, I use that rainwater for irrigation. I don't use grey water for irrigation, I use fresh rainwater. I use it for the washing machine, I use it to wash the vehicles. I use it for the lot. There's no issue at all with it. There's no need to save water, particularly in the West Country in the UK. So yes, your mileage may vary, but in my opinion, flush and lube wins out every time. Thanks for watching.